extravagant. We as a culture get extravagance. Here's just what happens. We don't always point that extravagance towards God. And so as we enter into a really challenging season, what we're going to see in Mark 14 is a story about what extravagant worship looks like. How do we, with everything that we have, make God the most valuable object in our lives? How do we communicate that? How do we show him? How do we get our hearts to a place where we can't do anything other than think of the value of who God is, specifically in the person and work of Jesus Christ? And so if you have your Bibles, this is a story of the woman who anointed the feet of Jesus. And so we're going to be in Mark 14. We're going to be in chapter 14, verse 3. And so just to give you some background, it was a couple of days before Passover. And Passover was the primary feast that the Jewish people celebrated. And it was a remembrance of when they were captives in Egypt. Maybe you remember the Charlton Heston movie. And God told Pharaoh, let my people go, or I'm going to continue to punish you. And the final punishment was that the angel of death would come into Egypt and kill the firstborn in every household. The way that the Jews were saved from that was they would slaughter a lamb and spread the blood of the lamb on their doorposts. The angel of death would see that and pass over their house. And so Passover became this time-honored celebration that was one of the foundational elements of Jewish religious life. And so that was what they were celebrating, right? It's kind of like Christmas for us, right? This was a huge feast, and they were eating a Passover meal. And so at this meal, here's what happens. Let's read here in 14 verse 3. And while he was at Bethany, Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. So I just want to stop right there because this is the first aspect of extravagant worship I want us to dive into and get our minds around. It's accessible. Here's what happened. As soon as I told you that extravagant worship is what we need to do, a lot of you checked out and said, no, not me. That's not for me. I would love to be able to worship God extravagantly, but I can't. You don't understand. You don't know my past. You don't know my present. You don't know who I am. You don't know what people say about me. Worshiping God is not for me. That's for other people. I can't worship God because I don't live in the right neighborhood. I'm not a put-together person. I can't worship God because my life is a mess. I can't worship God because of what other people say about me. I can't worship God because of my reputation. I can't worship God because I don't have an education. I don't understand everything about the Bible. I can't worship God because I'm a sinner. Here's the good news, is the first aspect of worship that we see in this story is that there are two people in the presence of Jesus that really have no business being there. So go back and let's dive in here. Whose house was he at? His house, the house was owned by a guy named Simon the leper. And so here's what we know about lepers back then. We can talk about social distancing and understand the life of a leper at a level we've never been able to as a society. Because if you were a leper, you were highly contagious and you had a skin disease that numbed your extremities. So eventually what would happen is you'd smash your finger or burn something and you wouldn't feel it. So your skin would get infected and slowly fall off. You kind of look like Voldemort a little bit. And so nobody wanted to be around the lepers because nobody wanted to catch leprosy. What happened to Simon is that Simon was healed by Jesus of his leprosy. But here's what would happen. Even if you were healed, there was this stigma that followed you when you were a leper. You were considered sinful. You were considered unclean. Nobody wanted to be around you, much less have something like an intimate act of eating dinner at your table. And so the fact that Jesus is eating a meal at the house of Simon the leper is already a shocking reality that flies in the face of the way people would act back then, right? So, for example, let's fast forward. Your neighbor just recovered from the coronavirus, and you go over and have dinner and shake his hand, right? Like instantly you guys are cringing right now, but that's what was going on here societally, okay? Here's the second person you see come in. A woman came in. Now, that's not weird for us to read, right? But listen, at the time, in that culture, a woman would never come in and interrupt a meal, especially a Passover meal, unless she was bringing food, okay? So for her to come in and actually interact with Jesus, that was against every societal norm. She had no business doing that. It wasn't proper. And so what's amazing about Jesus, and you see this throughout his life, and this is a reality that you have to let sink into your heart, is that he constantly attracted the people that were on the fringes of society. The people that the world said were unclean, the people that the world said weren't good enough. Those were the first people that Jesus invited into his presence, and they're the people that he responded to the most strongly. And so listen, we may be entering into a season where it's time to worship. For a lot of you guys, it's time to stop letting your past keep you from worshiping God. It's time to fully and freely embrace extravagant worship this season, because the only requirement for you to worship God is that you have a faith in Jesus Christ.